Hey y'all, today I'm going to try to explain what systemd and journald are, how to turn on logging on your Raspberry Pi, and why you shouldn't just be like me and copy and paste stuff from Claude blindly into your terminal, or any AI, or the internet. Okay, we're going to learn the easy way instead of the hard way today. The first things, what are systemd and journald? Well, systemd is a daemon that manages your services. Services are things that you run on your machine, right? So you buy a machine to run a service on your machine. For example, if you're hosting a web service, you're going to have a web server on your machine. You'll probably have a reverse proxy that does the routing for your web service, right? So you have these things on your machine, and you set them up and they're running, and you direct your users at them, and people are using it and getting content from your machine, and all is good. And then the machine reboots. Oh no, the machine reboots, and when it reboots, all the processes die on that server. How do you get the processes back up? You have a daemon that manages how these services start, stop, and reboot, and you give it that config on how to do that, and it manages the services for you, right? And this daemon is called systemd. And when the services have problems, they've had a bad day, they aren't eating enough, they have their own diary where they record all their thoughts. So if a service is having a problem, you can go read its diary and you can figure out what it's thinking. And the daemon that manages the service's diaries is called journald. And I was working with a service on the Raspberry Pi that I was connecting to, mainly the networking Wi-Fi services. And the only way that I could get these services to work again was by rebooting the Pi, and then I could get into the machine. But unfortunately, none of the logs were there because on reboot, all the logs had been deleted. And so I went to Claude and I was like, Claude, all my logs are gone. I can't debug my service. Help me, please. And Claude said, that's strange. It seems like the storage for your journald service must be set to volatile. But the default is auto, which should have some persistent logs as long as services are fine with their diaries persisting. And so I was like, okay, well, it's not on AutoCloud because my Wi-Fi service says it's okay with it persisting its diaries, and its diaries aren't getting persisted. So what is going on, Claude? And Claude said, well, double check, make sure that you're ignore that. That is breaking the rules. We're skipping ahead. Okay. Claude said, check etc systemd, the config for your journal. See what it said as. And I'm not overriding it, right? I have storage auto there. That's just the default line that comes. So I'm not overriding it. And I just did the same thing. I overrided it. I put persistent here, and I restarted my journald service. I was like, that's gonna work. That's gonna work. I rebooted my system. I made sure my logs were there, but they weren't. And I was like, Claude, I changed it just in case to override it. Why isn't it staying? Why aren't the logs persisting? And Claude searched the internet and found this Reddit. And Claude was like, there is this conf file here. You must change it. So I see, oh yeah, it's overriding it, and it's a rule that's going to get applied on top of my config. And if I was smart at the time, I could have used, not smart, let's be nice to Passkurt. If I knew what I was doing a little bit more, I could have done this. And I could have seen, oh my God, this file, this crazy Swedish guy that Claude found on the internet does exist. and it's overriding on it's going on top of it. It's overlaying it, right? And so the crazy Swedish guy and Claude both told me to edit this file and to reboot the service. But hold up. I've been a little bit of a Linux administrator before, and I happen to know that anything that's under user lib is maintained by a library. And them things get reinstalled because they get updates. And when they get updates, this config file that's here, it overwrites it. It does not care if I changed it. It wants it to be what it wants it to be. And on a reinstall, it's going to change it and overwrite all my settings. So now when it gets restarted, the service, it's going to go back to being volatile, and I'm going to have to debug something, and suddenly all my logs are going to be missing. And crazy thing, I asked Claude, where'd you get this information, honey? And Claude sent me a link for this. And when I scroll down, we see the hero of the story, Bob the motherfucking Pumpkin. And Bob the motherfucking Pumpkin says, you should not edit files in /user. You can fix this in a more maintainable fashion by adding a file in etc systemd journald.conf.d. He had a little bit of typo, but we still love Bob. And he says it needs to be number greater than 40, so it gets implied on top of it. It gets overlaid, right? And it should be the following contents. Tells us exactly what to do, tells us how to set it up. And no one listens to him. They say, thank you very much, crazy Swedish guy. We don't give a fuck about you, Bob the Pumpkin. And poor old Bob, he continues. He tries to say, dudes, you really have to do this shit. Anyway, I followed Bob the Pumpkin's advice. I should have probably posted on here, thanks, Bob the Pumpkin. I will later on. I don't want to do it live. I get antsy and anxious when people be watching me. Anyway, thank you, Bob the Pumpkin. We love you. But when I'm teaching, I try to think of how to add more than what I just did. You know, we can still learn from my past mistakes. And what should we really have done in order to figure out this problem? Maybe we should have looked at the documentation. So Raspberry Pi actually has a setup for how to configure logging. Logging is an advanced option, typically only needed if you need to change how system log data is managed or configured, which is what we want to do. We don't want the default volatile. We want it. And so we can look at this, and it says to run this sudo Raspberry Pi config. And then it says to go to advanced options, logging. And spoiler alert, Bob's still going to win the day. Y'all will see why. Actually, no one's going to win the day because I'm going to have some things to throw at y'all. Some things to canoodle on. We're going to set persistent, and we're going to finish it up. Okay. And if we were to restart the system, it would come up and reboot, but the things wouldn't have changed. We are going to restart the system because I want to make sure that we have logs from past reboots, and how we'll do that is do journalctl list boots. Right now we only have one because we aren't persisting logs. We need to do a restart of the journald system, and how we restart services and with system D is with systemctl restart, and we're going to put the service name, which is systemd-journald, and that will have restarted the service. So now we're going to reboot the machine and see if we get, when it comes back up, a new boot. What we need to think about when we're turning on logging to persist is that if you only have a tiny amount of disk space, like you have an 8 gigabyte or a 4 gigabyte SD card, you don't want to just keep all the logs in the world. So you need something to rotate your logs. And now the thing about Journal D is it manages its own logging, right? So if we are in the machine and we look again at the config for Journal D, is system D analyze cat config system D journal D.conf. There are settings in here which say how much you should keep. And when you get rid of files, it's called rotating the logs. And the max files we're going to keep are up to a month. So this is your time-based cutoff for how long you'll keep the log files. The thing is, like, anything older than a month will get cleared up. The thing is that if you have a boot that's been running for a really long time, or a lot of services are being really chatty in their diary, and you have a tiny file system, you might want to tweak these settings, and there's lots of different settings. So what I would do if I were you is go to journal D retention or rotate settings conf. And you can set all of these different things, and then you would just restart system D journal D again like we did before. It's probably better to look at a more official man page, which is something like this, but you can look into the settings more as they become relevant to you in your life. We can see we rebooted, so if we list boots, there's now, that was our previous boot, -1, and now we're on boot 0, which is our boot. Opposite. We're -1. It was the first boot. So yeah, that's how you turn on persistent logging on your Raspberry Pi. Thank you to Bob the Pumpkin, crazy Swedish guy. You tried your best. Thanks for turning us on a little bit to the right answer, but maybe we should have just waited for Bob the Pumpkin. Oh, last thing is, if we do this, we do see that this was placed in the same directory that Bob the Pumpkin told us to put. Oh, sorry, this one. I was about to say that Bob the Pumpkin told us to put our config, right? So Bob the Pumpkin said, let's go to Etsy system D, journal D, conf.d. And where does this Raspberry Pi config CL2E put its thing? Oh my God, same directory as Bob the Pumpkin with a number that's greater than 40, just like Bob the Pumpkin told us to do. So when in doubt, listen to Bob the Pumpkin. Anonymous Cum Basket, please thank the proper person next time. Thanks for your consideration. If you would like me to make a video about anything else that sprung from this, let me know, or just ask me questions. And if I don't know, I will try to find out. Have a good day. Bye.